television ministries because they were 501c3s, and he wanted to make sure they were spending their donations right.
Oh.
And so this is the same thing that LBJ. But now the question is, the ACLU is a 501c3 organization. Is the federal government going to check out how all these attorneys are getting paid and what they're doing with it? Planned Parenthood is a 501c3 organization. Are we going to have the federal government audit Planned Parenthood? Playboy has a 501c3 organization. Is the federal government going to? So how come the federal government only wants to pick on the church 501c3s and not these other 501c3s? So we begin to see this selective and not selective. But that it's important to understand this trend toward concentrating power. One philosopher I want to talk about briefly is Machiavelli. Machiavelli lived in Italy 500 years ago. And Italy wasn't Italy. Italy was a bunch of little kingdoms. And they're always fighting each other with armies and navies, Venice and Genoa. And Machiavelli said, you know, if one prince could control all of Italy, it would stop all this infighting. So he came up with a book called The Prince for Lorenzo de' Medici. And in there he advocates a thing called the ends justifies the means. The end result is if it's so good, like the prince taking over all of Italy, any means to get there is okay. So what would happen is the prince would try to take over a city. And if the people didn't want him to, they'd hate him. But if the prince paid somebody to burn barns, kill cows, create crisis and terror, the people would cry out for help. The prince would come in, kill the guy that he bribed, and nobody would know the better for it. And the people would praise the prince as a hero. So it's a good marketing. You create the need and fill it. You go around the back of the house and set it on fire. Then you go around the front of the house and sell them a fire extinguisher. And it's this idea that you have to create the crisis, and it's okay to lie, cheat, steal, do voter fraud, give speeches to the entire country filled full of lies, because any means are okay as long as your goal is achieved.
Well, pardon me for interrupting, but that sounds a whole lot like Rules for Radicals, even though it's called The Prince. Today, that's been wholly accepted in community operations of various kinds. Rules for Radicals, hasn't it?
Right. Saul Alinsky wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. The president taught this class for Acorn. And in there it says that anything is okay to achieve your goals. Voter fraud, intimidation, bribes, lying, anything.
Machiavelli.
And it even says in there that this works great against Christians because you hold them to a higher standard and make sure that they tote the line. But since your standard is whatever it takes to win there, so you don't have to tote it. So he says you can win it. And he dedicated his book to Lucifer.
Really?
He said that to the first one who rebelled against the establishment, Lucifer. So this is the book that has David Alinsky, the son of Saul Alinsky, said that he mentored the president in this idea that you want to have these crises. So you go into a community that is the have-nots, and you want to stir up their discontent, and you represent them to the haves, and therefore you get catapulted into power, and you set up a dictatorship.
I have one quick question. We're running out of time. How late is it, and is it too late for Christians to reclaim liberty and free speech?
It's getting close. And but the little phrase I use is it's a crisis that brings people to Christ. So the same crisis they're using to consolidate power, to take control, maybe God has a plan behind the plan, and it's that same crisis that's going to cause people to be shaken and turn to Christ.
And you know, that's what we're about here at Prophecy in the News. We talk about latter-day prophecy. We talk about the Bible, speaking of the rise of an iron-fisted global empire, and we see all of the signs leading up to that today. But it's not too late to apprise yourself of some great information. Endangered Speeches, William J. Federer. Any final words?
Just Ronald Reagan gave a quote. The government that's big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take away everything you have.
Wow.
So yes, you want the government to take care of your health care, welfare, retirement. Oh, it's all great, but they can also decide who doesn't get it. And that's how Adolf Hitler came to power. Adolf Hitler ran promising universal health care, and he was very eloquent, and Germany had an economic crisis, and so he got in power, but then their economy cratered. So he said, we need a stimulus package. We need to cut Medicare expenses. We need to cut useless waste. So Hitler began to send to the gas chambers the retarded, the insane, the epileptic, the chronically ill, those with dementia and Alzheimer's. They were useless. They didn't know their own name. Then they got rid of the seniors. And then they got rid of the convicts in prison. Then they got rid of the people speaking out against the government, holding them back from their utopia. And then they got rid of the Jews. They said on evolution, the Aryan race was superior and these others were not. And so their twisted philosophy. So we say, how could this advanced country of Europe do a horrible Holocaust? Well, it started with a nation in debt. People were out of work without health care. A new leader promising universal health care. And then their economy cratered and they had to cut expenses and they sent them to the gas chambers.
Well, listen, I think you can tell that William Federer is a veritable fountainhead of historical knowledge, very pertinent to what's going on today. The book, Endangered Speeches, if you want to pursue this line of reasoning. And Bill, thanks for coming by Prophecy in the News today.
Thank you.
And we are going to have to call it quits right now because we've run out of time. This has been another Prophecy in the News update. I'm Gary Stearman.